should be left well alone.
Welcome to Moonside Lake Builds, episode 4. So when I started playing Bloodborne a few years back, immediately I knew I would love the Blade of Mercy and the flashy, good-looking weapons, etc. But that I did not like very much. I don't know, the Logarius wheel, for example, or the big big strength weapon in general. That's the case in most of the Souls games. Except that with time I discovered the sheer joy of using the flat arcane Logarius wheel, for example. And I started to grow very fond of it because Jesus, it's a monstrosity, and we'll talk all about it in this build. But there are also lots of other weapons that I never really quite liked. The Tonitrus, the Amygdalin arm, the boomhammer, basically all the strength weapons or the strength arcane weapons. Even the moonlight, the holy moonlight sword, I'm not a big fan of. I like the beam, it's looking good, etc. But to play it is not very, I don't know, satisfying, not very rewarding somehow. And but the worst of all of them was the Amygdalin arm. I really had no love whatsoever for the Amygdalin arm. And so a few months ago I thought, screw that. What have I not done in this game? And I thought of the Amygdalin arm, the Tonitrus, etc. And of course they are all strength / arcane weapons. And I thought, okay, let's just make a build with all those, like, focused on using all those weapons. And this is what we are going to talk about today. I present you the Moonitrus Boomygdarius. This build is basically using the minimal amount of strength and arcane to make the best use of all those strength arcane weapons. I am soul blood level 76, and as you can see I have only 28 in strength, 12 in skill and 18 in arcane. I have 22 in endurance and 41 in vitality. So you will tell me, but why would you stop at 28 strength? If you really want to keep your blood level as low as possible, wouldn't 25 be better? And you would be absolutely right, because at 25 strength you can use all of my main melee weapons with pretty much the exact same amount of damage as in 70, as explained in my first videos. At 25 in strength you would already dish out about 70-75% of the maximum amount of damage that you can deal with the weapon. But with 28 I add a little useful addition to the mix, and this is the gatling gun. The gatling gun is a fantastic weapon to complement builds that lack any form of ranged damage, and trust me, if you do a lot of PvP and FRC you will need a little bit of ranged damage to maintain pressure on the amygdala and ebrietas mostly, but also on other bosses every now and then, or as finishers in desperate situations, etc., and hunters. It helps immensely. So yeah, the gatling gun at 28 strength, and coincidentally, very interestingly, pretty much all the good strength / arcane weapon also need 12 in skill to be used. So it makes things extremely synergetic And that's what I liked most about this build, is that basically there is not one single point wasted. So 28 in strength and 12 in skill, and you can use the Gatling gun to maintain a little bit of pressure at range. Okay, check. Now what do you use for counter? I use the Hunter Blunderbuss. And the Hunter Blunderbuss is usually on this sort of build I slot with just a life regeneration gem, a pulsing gem. But here I actually found this insane monster that basically makes your Hunter Blunderbuss hit almost as hard as if you had 25/50 in blood tinge. It's insane. It actually hits hard. So it is a very, very, very good combo, this Blunderbuss and this blood gem that adds flat 31.6 damage. So each pellet dish out a huge amount of damage, so namely 78. Okay, so that's it for just what I have in the offhand. Why do I not use the cannon? I explained it already, I think, in the video that I called the Qualitinge build. On the Qualitinge build I use the cannon because I have 25 in blood tinge, and that bumps quite significantly the damage of your cannon, so that when you shoot you feel it. Like you can almost, with a bone marrow ash, you can almost kill the mobs in an FRC dungeons, almost. Here it would be utterly useless. It would be a complete waste of bullets and efforts and time. So I'm not using it on this build. Now, what I am using is the Amygdalan arm, the Logarius wheel, the Tonitrus, the boomhammer, the holy moonlight sword, sort of, sometimes. And that's the weapon I used to level up, so I kept it and slotted it with a little bit of fire damage just for, I don't know, because I had the gems, I never use it. As you can see, when you go through those, you can see a pattern. One, that the maximum amount of skill that you require is 12. And as I said earlier, it synergizes really well with the fact that you need also 12 to use the Gatling gun. So check, 12 in skill, not a single point more, and you're good. If you wanted to use the cannon, you would actually need to go to 13, which, yeah, is one more point not invested somewhere else that is actually useful. Those weapons, most of them are largely skewed towards strength scaling. As you can see, they all scale much better on strength than they do on skill anyway. So obviously you will want to have 25 in strength to really start dealing some damage with them, and 28 is just a few notch up, and that's enough. The other advantage of those weapons, that they are all split damage, all of them. Lost Amygdalan arm does physical and arcane, physical and arcane, physical and bolt, physical and fire, physical and arcane. So that in the end, the weapons benefit immensely from nourishing gems. Now, the nourishing business in Bloodborne is a bit bizarre, because basically when you look at the damage you deal with split damage weapons that rely on nourishing gems, you feel like you can deal immense damage, but that you need to basically invest into, well, all the stats that actually benefit in terms of scaling to your weapon. So in the case of the Amygdalan arm, like, let's take the king of the nourishing weapons, the holy moonlight sword. Technically, if I wanted to take really advantage of the Holy Moonlight Sword, I would need to actually go to 50 strength, 50 skill, and 50 arcane. Okay? That would be where I would deal the most damage. And indeed, you do. This is the single most damaging weapon in the game at high level. There's no question about it. When you have 50 in all those three stats, you hit, you just barely touch your R1 and suddenly you dish out 1,000 points of damage on pretty much anything. It's insane. So when you actually go into the L2 and the charged R2, etc., you just... So yes, it's true that if you push all your points up to 15, all the scaling stats on your weapon, then nourishing gems will do a massive amount of damage. But interestingly, it is also the case at very low level, where when you do not have the stats to really scale and up the scaling on your weapons, and that's true for your physical weapons as well, having a gem that allows you to tap into the alternative damaging source, in this case mostly the arcane, the fire here, the bolt here, arcane. The gems that allow you to tap into the usually negligible or just minor aspect of the damage of the weapon allows you to sort of make up partially for your bad scaling. And that's exactly what all this build is about. Despite the fact that I have only one stat that scales, and of course it's the best for all of those weapons, I mean, there's no question about it. I will talk about the Moonlight Greatsword and how people are so mistaken about believing that, yeah, this is an arcane weapon. It's not. But anyway, the fact that I have just enough strength to get like about 70% of the maximum amount of damage I can deal with my weapons, but pretty much not much else. I just have 18 in arcane, which is good enough to use the ogre of ebrietas. That's the whole point. And also add a little bit of scaling on my weapons. But the truth is, all those weapons, apart from the Holy Moonlight Sword and the wheel to a certain extent, basically do not benefit at all. Oh, well, actually, it's not true. The Tonitrus benefits immensely from arcane. But, for example, the boomhammer doesn't, and the amygdalan arm doesn't really benefit from the arcane scaling. It's actually pretty bad. It's only C and C, both of them. They are really bad. The trick is that the Tonitrus and the Logarius wheel don't have actually a worse scaling, but the transformed version of those weapons completely boosts the scaling, or at least the damage on the arcane side of things. So it's completely skewed. The amygdalan arm doesn't. So yeah, typically if you had a build with 50 arcane on your amygdalan arm, you would basically do what? Maybe plus 100 arcane instead of plus 86. You know what I mean? It would be completely negligible. It would also not be noticeable in the stats page here for the Tonitrus or the wheel, but the truth is that the damage with those weapons would be much bigger, because when the Tonitrus and the wheel are transformed, the scaling is like multiplied by, I think the Tonitrus multiplies by 1.7, and the wheel just simply multiplies the arcane damage source by 4 plus an additional modifier. I mean, that's just completely different. But okay, so the idea, the whole point is that at very low level with bad stats, as in like limited scaling stats, the nourishing gems make a great job at tapping into this extra resource to make it a decent damaging source, and makes up for your lack of scaling. So typically you would deal less or similar amount of damage with say, I don't know, a whirligig saw at 25 strength that you buff with very good gems. You would do a similar sort of damage than what you do with those nourishing oriented weapons at low level. Maybe a little bit worse, actually. Whereas if you go to the meta level, as in the mid-range level, where, for example, your moonlight sword, you can't really quite go to having 50 everywhere. You have to choose. So usually, if you had to choose for a build that's blood level 120 to optimize your moonlight sword, you would go to 50 strength, 25 dexterity, and 25 arcane. That's the best you get for this weapon. And then as you go, actually, if you really want to use it at sort of mid level, like blood level 100, you would want to use 25 in strength, 25 in skill, and 25 in arcane. That is what gets you the maximum bang for your bucks. It does a really good job at this level. But at blood level 100, you would deal similar or actually better damage with other weapons as well, especially weapons that deal that consume less stamina. So in the end, in terms of raw damage, you would probably be better off with other weapons, especially if you had, like, for example, a pure skill build with like 50 in skill and you use the Rakuyo. You would get a much better damage output with your Rakuyo buffed and the Beast Blood pellet on top of it than you will get with your Holy Moonlight Sword, even with 3 nourishing gems on it. 3 abyssal nourishing, that's what I meant. So in the mid-range, around the meta level, usually the nourishing weapons I find are a bit lackluster compared to their pure, either pure arcane or pure blood tinge or pure physical damage. And that's my whole point, is that at low level, the nourishing weapons are better than their counterpart. At very high level, they are too. But in the mid-range, they kind of suck. It's not that they completely suck like everything else. You know, if you know what you're doing in these games, you can make anything work perfectly. But it's just that you have to admit that some things are better than others. So coming back to this build, I will basically try to convince you that yes, at low level the nourishing gems are actually good. Well, nourishing or split damage weapons are actually better at low level and high level than they are at mid range. And since everybody knows, and I don't have the intention to go to soul level 150 or above to get like a super monstrous moonlight sword that just pulverizes anything that it touches on the press of an 1L2, I'm not really interested in that. I actually decided to go for the opposite. So let me talk about the king of Bloodborne low-level weapon. Let's talk about the Logarius wheel. The Logarius wheel, apart from the fact that it is the single most rad, badass looking weapon in the game, I mean, what is more rock and roll than a big fucking wheel like this? And that's why actually this character is like sort of looks like an old ominous biker. The wheel is a pure strength weapon that scales extremely well on strength. So you can make perfectly good use of the wheel on a pure strength weapon with only 10 arcane to use the basics. But then you will actually be stuck with the non-transformed movements that does immense physical damage and just uses the plus 50, the 50 arcane damage. Here you see a massive number in my arcane adjustment, and that's because I'm using flat arcane, but I'm coming back to that in a minute. Let's focus on what the normal scaling of the wheel is. The wheel scaling is non-transformed, you deal 100% of your physical damage plus your 50 points of arcane. So if you have 50 in strength, this will atomize anything, will deal an immense amount of damage, pure blunt damage all the way through. Okay, so you can slot it with massive blunt gems and you will deal massive blunt damage with that. But the moment you transform this, you lose 30% straight off the bat. You lose 30% of your physical damage, and you multiply your 50 arcane damage by 4. So suddenly it's not that great to, well, it still deals 70% of quite a high number of blunt damage, so it's still good. But suddenly it gets a massive buff in the damage on the arcane side. Now, that is in itself interesting for suddenly you think, oh, then I need to put some points in arcane. But the truth is, it doesn't scale well at all. It multiplies the scaling. It multiplies the damage of arcane by 4, but whether you have 10 or 25 would be the same. Now, it also improves quite noticeably the scaling of the damage in arcane when it's transformed. So if you have 50 or 25 in arcane, then suddenly you start actually feeling an improvement in your damage output. So you could, for example, like once more at high level, if you want to do the ultimate wheel, you will slot nourishing gems on it, and you will use the wheel with 15 strength and 15 arcane, and then you will actually deal massive damage with both forms, the transformed and the untransformed forms. Now, there is a trick to this. That's the only weapon in the game that does that. There is a trick about. Oh, well, actually, it's not true. The Willy Gixo has sort of the same feature, but not quite. The transformed mode, rolling R1s, R2s, jumping R2s, what else? Running R1s, do this sort of rolling, like you see the wheel is turning, and that activates one of the properties of the wheel, is the multi-hit aspect of it. So when you hit, it actually enters a rotation and adds two ticks of damage. And that's where the flat arcane becomes monstrous on this. So when you actually hit with either this, or not this one, or this, or the running R1, then the multi-hit attack allows you to add on the two subsequent, so you hit the first normal hit as you do with any other weapon, and then the two subsequent rotations of the wheel add additional damage that are not very impressive by themselves. But if you have flat gems, flat damage gems, be it plus arcane, plus physical, plus fire, plus bolt, you don't really care, plus anything, the plus will be added to each rotation, so twice. Now, let's take a look at how you slot this weapon to make really a good monster. You add flat arcane gems. So the flat arcane gems are gems that do actually a rather lackluster amount of damage in the physical side of things, plus 9%, not that great. Note that my the two radials are absolutely optimal. You can't get any better than this. In the physical, you could get blunt versions up to 10.5%. You can go also nourishing. I tried very hard. I farmed it. I farmed the brain sucker for probably 3 hours, and I had a few nourishing that dropped. That they were all with shitty curses or bad stats. So in the end, I'm not using them, and I use those on. So see the triangle here that is plus 7.3%, plus 75. It's actually pretty decent. It would do a very good job on the wheel, but I don't know. I prefer just the basic damage. It looks better on the paper. I like the numbers. I don't know. Anyway, forgive me. So the plus 9.1% plus 70 plus 67.5 is pretty much optimal for this purpose. On the radial aspect of things, I am using versus skin curse, because versus the kin I will never ever use the wheel. The kin is resistant to both types of damage dealt by the wheel. Blunt, they don't give a fuck, and arcane, most of them don't give a fuck. So yeah, not gonna use the Logarius wheel against the kin. And the triangle gem is plus 9.5 instead of a maximum that would be plus 9.8. You know what? In the end, it's plus 215 physical versus 216. So nobody gives a crap. And again, with attack versus skin curse, which is, in my opinion, by far the best curse to have on the Logarius wheel. So the idea, coming back to the flat arcane damage addition, is that every time you actually swing your wheel, you add the flat arcane damage. So if I do R1, a normal transformed R1, so if I don't transform my weapon and I just go R1, I will deal 200 plus 215 of physical, plus 50, plus 216 arcane. That's what I'm going to do. Now, if I do this, and I do just an R1, R1 doesn't have any multi-hit. This weapon will deal 70% only of the 200 plus 215 physical damage. So you do your math on your physical side, and then you take only 70% of this as damage dealt to your target. But it will also deal 4 times 50 plus 216 plus a little bit more because of the improved scaling, but that's not negligible. So it will deal in the end something along the lines of 300 points of damage in physical, plus about 416 points of damage in arcane. Okay, so I deal way more damage with this build, and actually pretty much any build deals more damage in the transform state, except the very the builds that focus on the physical side of things and have gems that deal only blunt damage, etc. But you deal more damage with the transformed form. Now, if I do use an attack like this, where it rolls, it rotates, then what will happen is I will deal like the normal R1, 70% of 200 plus 215 physical. Plus, on the first initial hit, 200 plus 216 damage of arcane. But then, on the 2 subsequent revolutions of the wheel, I will add another round of a very negligible amount of damage plus 216 each time. So you add an extra 432 points of damage in arcane after your initial hit, which is why the Logarius wheel slotted with flat arcane is a force of nature. And this is also why this is by far the best weapon in the game at very low level. So if you want to do a twink that deals stupid amount of damage, despite the fact that it has only 20 in strength, 12 in skill and 10 in arcane, use the wheel. Because that thing just cannot be beaten in terms of raw damage output with the minimum amount of stats invested in it. That's absolutely impossible to beat. Now, why would you do that? Well, that is a very different question. I used to be, like everybody else, I used to twink and go grieve noobs at one point, but you just grow very, very tired of it very quickly, because I don't take any pride or satisfaction from this, especially not in Bloodborne, because Bloodborne netcode and the gems and the whole system is really tweaked in favor of this sort of thing, and there's nothing you can do as a new player really. You just sit there and get massacred. Anyway, different story. Okay, so here is the wheel. Now, an additional feature of the wheel. This. Now, I will need to go back to display what happens here. See, my life is going down. If I stop it, it doesn't move. Now, every time you press L2, you give one additional rotation. See, the red aura starts to glow much more intensely. And if I do give another, and another, and another, up to 4, this thing starts draining. Look at how much my life get drained. Now, the good news is that yes, it drains your life, but you can see that you have like this rally temporary bar in your health bar that appears, that allows you to basically recover those hits. If you're aggressive, you lose, it drains your life, but you know what? You actually recover your life, so it's okay. So that's a great feature. It's not like the Shikage, for example, where it drains your life and it's gone. There's no choice. But the other really great feature about it is that you also considerably improve your arcane scaling. Now, it's not gonna show on the stat screen here, so you can't tell. But it's actually every revolution will boost your arcane scaling. So regardless of the original buff in arcane damage, that is, when you transform your weapon, you take your 50 points of arcane, you multiply that by 4, and then you add your flat. No, this does that, and it also improves the scaling of the arcane damage. So the original 50 points of damage, its scaling is improved on your arcane stat. Which means that if you use this wheel with 50 arcane, oh god, yes, you want to use this feature at any cost, because you will deal much more damage. At low arcane, it still works. Still does a great job at buffing, but not as dramatically, obviously, because that's the whole point. That's all about scaling. Okay, let's really quickly talk about how you use the wheel. So I never use the wheel on this build untransformed. It can happen. You can make use of the charged attack, but I have other weapons that have a much better charged attack. So, but apart from that, it's not bad. You know what? It's not bad. It staggers immensely anything that it hits, so that's good. But it's not that great otherwise. The running attack, the running R1 is actually okay. And you know what? You can make use of it to do, for example, you run on your opponent and then you transform it. The transformation attack, as you can see, maybe you haven't seen it clearly, but there, it rotates. So multi-hit. Yeah, nothing really exciting in the non-transformed department, to be honest. Backstep is this, backstep R2 is that. Really not great. But the transformed, suddenly you have one of the best running attack in the game. Very quick, massive damage, super stagger, really good. This is a massive. It's so great to start a fight on a single target. Don't use that in groups. It's not a good idea. But on single target, it's like, yep, you're good to go. On groups, you would actually use the running R2 more because it has a wide arc, does quite good damage as well. So yeah. But this is, I use this weapon mostly on single hard target that you need to deal massive damage to, and also that are sensitive to arcane, obviously, and also that you need to stagger reliably, because that's what this weapon is really good at doing, especially this. Like, nothing can withstand the R2 from the wheel. And the R2 from the wheel, coincidentally, is extremely good at building beasthood. So, if you have a beast blood pellet ingested already, when you swing this R2, one R2 and you have half of your beasthood meter filled up. Straight up. So 2 R2s, you're good to go. You're maxed. And you can go to 10 with anything else that deals actual physical damage. And hello, what a perfect segue to my amygdalan arm. Ah, the amygdalan arm. I used to not like it. I used to like the sort of alternative metal aspect of it because it's really rad as well. Like, it's a lump of an alien thing that is half alive and it's great. But the moveset, man, when I saw that I was like, what the fuck is this? Oh god, that's so lame and boring. Like, boom, stomp, 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 stomp. It's ugly as fuck. The R2 is even worse. Oh, the R2. Oh god. The charged R2 has a follow-up, by the way. Oh god, it deals a lot of damage. So this, I was like, no, I can't. And then this, I was like, oh yeah, it's actually interesting, yeah. But you know what? It doesn't deal much damage. It was not very satisfying. I was like, yeah, no. And then this attack, I was like, oh yeah, I don't know, it's gimmicky, and the charged attack. And then you if you stay still and you don't touch your controller at all after those attacks, it does the follow-up. If you do this and you just move even a little bit, you interrupt it. Okay, anyway. So initially I was not in love with this weapon at all. I was like, god, what the fuck is this? But, oh god, was I wrong? God, was I wrong? It is a max awesome freaking crazy weapon to use. I had no idea. What is really good in this weapon is that non-transformed, it's fast. It's actually faster than the wheel if you compare. See? It actually hits much faster for a similar type of damage. Staggers the same way, crushes your enemy with pure blunt damage, or almost pure, because it has also a little bit of arcane split and a little bit more than the arcane non-transformed mode, but it's not what makes the weapon really. It actually costs a little bit to the weapon, because this weapon would be a much better weapon, to be honest, if it was a pure physical weapon and had no arcane damage whatsoever. And the truth is, most people actually completely ignore its arcane damage, and good on them, because it's probably the best way to use it. Like at 50 strength, you have an A scaling. It's really good enough. And you would deal maybe plus 400 in physical with good gems, in strength, and 50, maybe more actually, I don't know. Anyway, but that's not what I want, because I have 18 in arcane, which is not quite good enough, not quite 25 to make the best of the scaling. That is also quite bad. C in scaling in arcane is actually quite shit, especially based on just 80 initial damage. So you can see in the end, I just double my arcane damage, which is not quite amazing. But that's not the point. The point of this weapon is the flexibility. That's all about the flexibility. So you have this that is actually quite quick, all things considered. But this is just an insanely efficient crowd controller. In a dungeon, you have a lot of hyperarmor on a singular one, and you outreach anything, which make it insanely good at just wiping entire rooms or working out safely. You can swing against a wall and not have your swing interrupted. So you can actually use the glitch that hits through the walls very safely, etc. It's really, really comfortable. That's what it is. It's a comfortable weapon. It's a Mercedes-Benz from Bloodborne. It's not like the most flashy, insanely damaging stuff, but it's very safe and very reliable. And there are lots of things that are really good about it, that do a lot of damage, more damage than you might think. One of those is if you actually land this in the back of a monster, you make up for your lack of visceral. So this creates a visceral if it lands, and then you follow up while it's collapsed, and it does massive amount of damage. So does the charged attack on this. Collapsed, whack, whack. The wake up call, usually you just wipe out anything with my gems and my stats. It works, at least. So yeah, that's great. But my favorite aspect of the weapon is this. Oh my god. This is the single best running attack in the entire game, for PvE at least. I'm not talking about PvP, because I'm not doing PvP in this game, not much. But this cleanses groups for an opening. And you know what I usually find myself doing is I run into a group, I do that. If there is not many people, like if it's just one or two that are massed together, I follow up with the transformed attack. Look at this transformed attack. Whack! This deals massive damage. What is really good is also to use the fast movements on single target, and when you see that you have other goons that are coming, you just transform your weapon, and suddenly you have this massive sweep that is really fast. Or you don't even have to do the L1 first. You just roll and you transform. Whack! You arrive and you just unravel the goodness. In the middle of the group, you go roll in the middle, whack, 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 and you just swipe through the entire group in no time. So, and this is what is really good. Another thing that is really great with this weapon is the jumping R2. This is great too. Massive reach, massive impact and stagger. Awesome. All in all, this weapon is very underrated. Extremely underrated. I had the most success in PvP with this weapon I've ever had in this game as well. Because of the reach. It's very deceptive. The transformed attack, you never know what the guy is gonna do. And you never know if you are actually out of reach or not, if you can attack safely, because you can trade with it extremely efficiently. So yeah, it deals mostly physical damage and does not benefit greatly from the arcane damage, but it's good enough. What do I have slotted on it? I have good old massive nourishing abyssal gems that also happen to make massive damage at full HP. Why do I use that? Initially I slotted everything with attack versus open foes buffs because it's actually really working really great with attack versus open foes, because most of the time you will actually swing your weapon and trade, or end up trading if you don't want to, because it's not the fastest weapon ever. I mean, it's not the Blade of Mercy either, you know, but you deal some good decent damage output with that stuff, and it's very often triggering an exchange, how do you call that, a trade, and therefore activates the attack versus open foe. So an extra 15% of damage is always good to take. But I decided to actually use the attack at full HP because with the bonus attack at full HP, this sort of thing allows me to kill most enemies in one hit. And that is a massive plus in Bloodborne in general. That's actually let's just stop right there and talk about it for 1 minute. What is a good amount of damage? It's the amount of damage that allows you to kill in the minimum amount of hits. A lot of players look at the AR and think, oh, I have to go as high as possible. It's true, of course. But it's just part of the equation. Let's imagine you have an opponent that has 1,000 HPs. The real luxury is to be able to dispatch this opponent in one hit. So if you have an R1 that deals 1,000 points of damage, well, that's it. You're done. You have probably the Moonlight Greatsword, and you are level 600 probably. But if you need to use the R2 or the running R2 or the L2 or whatever, like special attack to dispatch it, well, you still can get rid of the goon in one hit, which is a very good thing to keep in mind. Now, let's imagine that your R2 deals 1,000 points of damage, allowing you to kill the goon in only one hit, but your R1 deals, say, 600 points of damage. Well, you will need 2 R1s to kill it, right? But you would need still 2 R1s to kill it if you dealt 900 points of damage, or 500 for that matter. See, my point is that there are massive fluctuations in the amount of damage that you can deal, but in the end, it all has to be brought back in perspective of the HPs of the target. It's not an absolute value. By itself, the AR means shit. what is useful is how many hits do you have to land in order to dispatch an enemy. So if you deal, say, if you have an opponent that has 1,500 points HPs, and you deal, let's say, 500 points of damage on each R1s, then you need to hit it 3 times. But you know what? If you dealt 800 points of damage, you would still have to hit it 3 times. Actually, no. 700, that's a bad example. If you dealt 700, 200 more, which is a solid 20% more damage, you would still have to hit it 3 times. So in the end, the truth is, on your character stat screen, you will see a massive difference. You will like, oh my god, deal 200 more points of damage, yeah. But in the end, you will still have to hit the goon 3 times. So in terms of gameplay, when you actually play the game, you will not notice the difference. It doesn't matter. At least when you're playing solo. It matters when you have several people playing with you, and it matters against HP sponges like the bosses that have lots of HPs. Then yeah, your raw damage will actually make a small difference, but you know, in the end it will not be massive. You know, it will just be a few hits difference. It can make the difference. It can make the difference between life and death, success and failure, of course. But in the grand scheme of things, AR is not that important. It just needs to be good enough to dispatch your average enemies as fast as possible. And that is why I decided to go with this type of slots, because it taps in all 2 types of damage on my amygdalan arm, and with the added full HP feature, I deal another 10% on top of it. That is enough to kill pretty much anything on one running R2, which is a great opening for groups. In co-op, it doesn't work anymore. So the moment I have someone in my world or I'm in someone else's world in an FRC dungeon, then suddenly the buff in resistance and an HP bar, I'm not sure which one is boosted anymore. Anyway, it makes that my R2 doesn't kill on 1 hit anymore. But yeah, essentially the nourishing gems here are just the normal gargoyle or radial, because you can get a 19.5% if you are crazy enough to spend hours farming roam for 0.2 more %. But quite frankly, that is insanity. Nobody does that. Nobody in its right mind, at least. Or you can wait for amygdala to drop an out of shape, which happens sometimes. You know, it's always the same. It does happen, but or you can use edited chalice dungeons to skew the drop rate. That's up to you. You choose. But yeah, ideally that's the sort of setup that you will want to use on this weapon. Obviously, you will want the lost version to get the most out of the imprints, to get the triangle and the radial, the waning, to get the abyssal nourishing from amygdala, to have the 21.5%, and then just 1 radial. The uncanny wheel, because for the flat arcane damage that I want to go for, you want to have 2 radials and 1 triangle. That's the best. Obviously the best would be 3 triangles, but that doesn't exist. So as you understand probably already, I basically use the wheel and the amygdalan arm all the time. it's my go-to weapon for this build. The split is this for single target and this for groups, pretty much. Or for, actually I use that versus hunters as well, because they can't do shit. The real great thing about this weapon is also it's one-handed, has massive sweeps, hyper armor, decent damage, not the best but decent damage, and still have this baby here available for counters and riposts, and that is all you need versus hunters. Anyway, so as you can see, they are all slotted. Those two are slotted with damage versus skin. Well, they deal blunt damage and arcane damage, both of them pretty much. Oh, one thing that I forgot to mention earlier is that the Amygdalan arm in transformed mode deals normal, standard physical damage, which actually deals decent damage to kin, as opposed to the blunt damage of this version that deals very shitty damage to kin. But anyway, what I have is gems that have a curse against the kin, so not good versus the kin. Why? Well, because versus the kin I have this. Oh yeah, baby. So the Tonitrus is the prototype of the weapon I've always hated. And I still don't like it. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's quite boring to use. It's just spammy. There's nothing fancy or rewarding to use in its moveset. It's actually quite boring. But it's so strong that it's impossible to pass. Not on this build. So you find it quite early in the game if you know where to look for it. And it has an insane damage buff when you L1 it. That is boosting its bolt damage by, it's basically doubling its bolt damage, and immensely boosts the arcane scaling damage of the bolt damage as well. So it's dealing a lot of bolt damage in the end. Let's just put it this way. Even when you don't have much arcane to make it scale on. So it's also scaling okay on strength B, and to a lesser extent on skill, but that's quite negligible. And this weapon is just a kin killer. Despite the fact that it deals bolt damage, you still deal so blunt damage. You still deal so much bolt damage with it that it's actually really good. So versus the kin, you want to use that. So what did I slot on that? Well, again, I slotted attack versus open foes or attack at full HP. They are not all abyssals. Like the waning is actually not great, but that's good enough. I stopped farming at this point because I was fed up with that, and it's really good enough anyway. It deals massive amount of damage to the kin, and that's all it is here for. That's pretty much it. Enough said. You just buff it, you spam it. That's how you use it. Now, the beauty of this build is that you can still use this weapon and Beast Blood pellet on top of it to boost its physical damage source. That is by all means not negligible. As you can see, it's still plus 223 physical, and it's just blunt damage. So remember that the kin is very resistant to it. But still, it deals a decent amount of additional physical damage to this already massive bolt damage that you deal with it. So you destroy the kin with this. Like, it's one of those typically underrated as misunderstood weapons. Like, a lot of people know that Tonitrus is absolutely monstrous, but when you just look at the stats, you think, yeah, I don't know. Look at that, like, 160 plus 223 blunt, and 80 plus 70. I would deal much more damage with that. No, you won't, because the bolt damage is massively boosted when you buff the L1, and that is not dispatched in the stat screen, and that is making the whole difference. So that's for the kin. Versus the beast, the truth is I very often use the Logarius wheel because the beasts are actually not particularly resistant to blunt or arcane, so it works just fine on them. But obviously I had to play with the boomhammer because hey, the boomhammer, the beast tenderizer. This thing is really fun to use, although very monodimensional. You can have it very early. As soon as you killed Amelia, you can go and fetch it in the nightmare. You will, however, realize that its strength is also its weakness. So it deals only blunt damage, so that's great for jamming purposes. On a pure strength build, you just slot blunt gems on it and you go to town, and this thing hits hard. You can even invest a little bit in skill and you will still benefit from its not stellar. E is pretty bad, but you know what, if you have points to spare on your build and you go to 25, I would never go higher than this but with 25 skill you will add maybe a total of, with good gems, maybe 30 or 50 additional physical damage thanks to on each swing, thanks to your skill. So why not? Of course I would not do that before I reach 50 in strength, to be honest, but anyway. Now, on it's just big swings, bigger swing, big smash, big bump. It's nothing fancy. It's just what you expect it to be. It's a big hammer. Now, let's take a look at its weakness. Look at my stamina bar. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I swing it 5 times. Now if I buff it with an L1, suddenly I will be able to swing it 3 times before being completely stamina depleted. This weapon eats your stamina with the buff. The buff is good. It adds 120 fire damage. In my case, it doubles it, so 248, because of the blunt gems plus the small arcane scaling with my 18 arcane. So it's sure, I'll take it. Especially considering that it's plus 300 on the physical side. It's good, but it's not good enough to really be efficient. So it does okay. Now the thing that you have to remember is, once you buff it, the swings add the fire damage to it, and the modifiers also apply to the fire damage and to the physical. So that makes for the king of attacks with this weapon the charged R2. So you buff it and you charged R2 it, and that multiplies your damage in physical and fire by a factor of a 50% boost. So it's a 1.5 multiplier, I think, or something like that. But in both, so you do actually a lot of damage with this sort of attack. On normal attacks, this weapon costs way too much stamina to actually be useful and compare and compete with the rest, in my opinion. So It's a circumstantial, I use that at least as a circumstantial weapon. And the way I use it is, I actually use for example, against a beast boss, I use the wheel to R2 my way up in terms of beasthood. So I go up a beast blood pellet, I swing R2 on the boss once or twice, I have immediately my beasthood through the roof, then I switch to this, I buff it, and I land a buffed attack, and that deals anywhere between 1,500 and 2,000 points of damage per swing. So yeah, it's good. But that's pretty much it, really. The real good attack that few people use on the hammer is this one. The jumping buffed R2 is awesome, absolutely awesome. If you parry a boss, you parry and you shit, I fucked it up. You parry and then you do that. Oh god, you deal a lot of damage instead of a visceral. It's way better on this build, obviously, because of lack of skill. And that's pretty much it for the boomhammer. Okay, let's just talk really quickly about the Holy Moonlight Sword. That, as you can see, I didn't slot at all in an optimal way. As I said earlier, if you want to make the most out of the Holy Moonlight Sword, you will want to use nourishing gems, because you will benefit from the two extremely good features of this weapon: the very good skill, the physical scaling, and the very good arcane scaling. It scales A on arcane, so Jesus, of course, as soon as you have 25 in arcane, you start feeling even at 18, you start feeling the scaling. So at 50, of course, it benefits from the arcane scaling and deals very good arcane damage. But the core of the weapon is a physical damage. This weapon is a quality weapon that also happens to have good arcane scaling. So let's talk about the weapon damage type really quickly so that it's done, because I will never do a build around that revolves around it. I did already, and I've thrown, actually I did it many times, several times, and every time I end up ditching those characters. Yes, because I have a disease. I've been, over the time I played Bloodborne, which is probably, well, it's 2,100 officially, but I had another account when it came out, and I played on another account for 2 years, so it's probably 3,000 hours, to be honest. Anyway, I ditched dozens of characters, and most of them probably had the Moonlight Sword at one point as main weapon. So I know all about this weapon. Let me tell you about it. This weapon deals 100% of its physical damage all the time. But in untransformed mode, like normal, it deals only 50%, if I remember correctly. Only 50% of the arcane damage listed here. Okay? So it's mostly physical damage here, but man, it's a really good damage. Like, especially those attacks. The charged R2, man, does so much damage. Also has a follow-up that does insane damage. Yes, it's really good. This, well, it's good. It has insane hyper armor, hits faster and faster as you swing it. Yeah, great. Now, what else? What is good? The running attack, the running R2 is great. The running R1 is nyeh. But the strength of this weapon obviously is the transformed state, where you basically have the moonlight coating, and suddenly when you swing your weapon, you still deal 100% of your physical damage, but you deal 100% of your arcane damage. Now you also get modifier on your swings, and the swings that make the weapon are obviously the R2 that sends flying an arcane beam. When you hit your opponent with that, you deal both the physical nature and the beam added nature in melee range, and if you hit only from afar with the beam, then only the arcane part of the damage, obviously, thank God. You can charge it, and you have a follow-up beam. Those beams, thanks to added modifiers, deal more damage with both the physical and the arcane damage, and also open for viscerals. And the real strength of this weapon that everybody knows is the freaking L2 that just knocks everything out. Deals insane thrust damage plus arcane explosion bonus damage, etc, etc. It's just oh god, yeah, it's good. Now a few things that few people use is the jumping R2 that deals also a beam, and things that very few people, because very few people know how to play the game with ravioli steps. But if you just use that with raviolis, you can just do really cool stuff in PvP. But with the netcode, it never lands, so I gave up on that. And the running R2 also does a beam. I think that's pretty much it. Normally, I would strongly suggest you see the gems I have on my amygdalan arm. I would totally put it on my moonlight sword. Well, I haven't, because I grew tired of farming, obviously, after a while. And as I said, I'm not a big fan of the Holy Moonlight Sword. What the Holy Moonlight Sword does, I can do with this, I can do with that. I don't have real use for the Moonlight Sword on this build. I would have a build with 28 strength or 25 strength, 25 skill, then yes, suddenly I ditch everything. I go, oh yeah, sure, because suddenly the physical damage on the Holy Moonlight Sword will outperform all those weapons. Because with the C scaling in skill, the Holy Moonlight Sword certainly benefits immensely from the skill, from the physical skill damage output. So I strongly suggest anybody out there who wants to do a Holy Moonlight Sword build, you go to 25 strength first with 12 dexterity and 14 arcane. Then, before you put skill any point further in strength or in arcane, go to 25 in skill, because then you have a weapon that scales to 75% of its ability on both strength and skill, and deals insane physical damage. Then you go to 25 arcane. So you have 25 strength, 25 dexterity, and 25 arcane. You can stop there. You have a massively damaging weapon. If you want to go further, then you add points in strength. From 25 you go to 50 if you want, before you add in skill and even in arcane. Now it depends on what you want to do. If it's your main weapon, yes, go 50 in strength before arcane. But if, like me, you use this weapon only for the beam, then go arcane. So 25 strength, 25 dexterity, and 50 arcane works great. Fine, do it. Your beams will deal massive damage. Your beams will deal massive damage if you, you have many ways of slotting and gemming your Moonlight Greatsword. One of them is what I've done, but that's not the best, not by a long shot. I've used a mix of flat arcane nourishing with actual nourishing. I think with actual nourishing I would do more damage because of the modifiers. This weapon does not benefit from the flat arcane damage. I have only 18 in arcane, so you know, it's basically in the end it's quite similar to having 3 nourishing gems. And it's also perfectly viable because these are basically at nourishing plus flat, so it's okay, but they are not the best gems out there. So this is the 2 gems I dropped from those many hours trying to farm those nourishing flat arcane gems for the wheel. I gave up. So I slotted on that. Well, it's just basically a pew weapon now for amygdala, I guess. But you know what? I don't use it because versus something like amygdala, what I will use is this and that. I will just basically just wait, like shoot amygdala from afar, force her to try to hit, lower her head, then go in and just pummel her, and that's it. Really, just destroy her like this. So this is a much better setup for amygdala, and the truth is the Holy Moonlight Sword, the real strength of the Holy Moonlight Sword, well, this, no, actually it's not true. I mean, the Holy Moonlight Sword is the ultimate weapon in Bloodborne because it's like the ultimate flexibility. It has everything in terms of scaling. You scale on strength, skill, and arcane so efficiently up to 25 that, you know, it's hard to beat. With good nourishing gems, it deals massive amount of damage, has a lot of flexibility in its moveset, but is also, I don't know, you grow tired of it quite fast, I find. But yeah, anyway. Well, that pretty much concludes everything I had to say about this build. Oh, actually, what I am using in terms of carry runes is the classic 20% stamina, 15% strength, and as I've already stated many times, instead of going, I have only 41 in vitality, so instead of going for a boost of additional 10% of HP that is already cut in half in my FRC dungeons, I actually prefer sucking up 5% of damage. And you know what? On this build it's even more important because my physical defense is not up to meta level. So as you level up, your physical or your resistances and your damage reductions increase. And at blood level 76 it's not at all as efficient as when you are high level. But the all damage reduction works in such a way that you really benefit from this, because then the damage that you take is already greatly diminished and you tank much more efficiently. And on this build, since I trade quite a lot with the Amygdalan arm, like going all nuts in the middle of groups and just wiping my way out, it just works. It just works great. So yeah, and obviously the stamina recovery, because Hunter is the only good good gem for the blue slot. I forgot the name of it. So yeah, here you go. This is my Moonitrus Boomygdarius build. Have so much fun with it. It's so efficient, despite the fact that on the paper, well, apart from the wheel that everybody knows deals insane damage, especially once slotted with the gems I have on it. But it's like, this is not dealing massive damage. It's just so handy and flexible that, you know, it's just great. Alright, let's just put this to the test and see how we fare. Alright, charged up to the max. Boom. Boom. That's what? Oh, that's 2000. That's almost cute. But look at that. Oh yeah.